Hello Suitors, with Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey coming out soon, which I'm super excited for by the way, and the amazing albums by Jorge Rivera Herranz,
I'm just a man,
or the Epic the Musical, I thought it would be nice to talk about a concept that comes up a lot in Homer's text, that being If you want to know what that is exactly, keep watching this video as we dive into some bits and pieces of the Odyssey and how they relate to Xenia. But before we get further into the video, my name is Matt, this is Footnotes and Folklore, and remember to dog ear that subscribe button so that you can keep me in your footnotes on YouTube. Now, onto the video. So, many of you are likely familiar with the gist of the Odyssey. Odysseus leaves Troy, ends up losing a ton of his men as he tries to get back home over a period of 10 years, even though the actual journey should have only taken him 6 days if he hadn't been such a hubristic ding-dong, and then finally gets home to kill all of the suitors and live happily ever after with his wife and son. Unless you read the Telegony, but that's a different topic for another future video if you guys are interested in that. Some of you might then ask, why are you even making this video, Matt? And to that I say, 'cause I can. But no, really, the reason is because of how awesome and rich the text is. By itself, if you read it just for the story and adventure, or for the epic poem verses if you're really fancy, the Odyssey is a true classic in every sense of the hero's journey. But you're not here for that, and neither am I, which is why today's video will focus and argue about why hospitality and the violation of hospitality in relation to honor is a central and recurring theme in the Odyssey, especially when you take into account what ancient Greek society was like at the time that Homer decided to write down the Odyssey for the very first time. Now, if you remember at the start of the video, I told you that we'd be going over Xenia. If you haven't guessed already, Xenia has to do with hospitality, which was a two-way street in ancient Greece and one of its most important social contracts. Xenia specifically translates to something like just friendship, and is or was the epithet meaning the aspect of some of the Olympians like Zeus Xenios and Athena Xenia, roughly translating to something like Zeus protector of strangers-ish. Hermes and Aphrodite also sometimes get associated with this epithet, but I couldn't find anything specifically concrete about them like Zeus and Athena, so I'll take that with a grain of salt. More importantly, Xenia as a system of hospitality is very closely related to the goddess Hestia. It was expected that in respect to her, hosts would provide protection and any resource to make their guests feel welcome and safe for however long their stay was. In return, guests would treat the host, their family, and home with respect and reverence as a mutual sign of good faith and honor to Hestia. Also probably because, just in case they were a god, you wouldn't get turned into a random bird or random flower for being rude to them. But back to Hestia. For those who don't know, Hestia is technically the oldest of the Olympians in terms of birth order, but also the youngest since she was the last sibling that Kronos vomited up according to Hesiod's Theogony and Pseudo-Apollodorus' Bibliotheca. I could dedicate a whole video to Hestia because of how interesting she is, but that's for another day. For now, it's important to note that we don't know too much about her because she doesn't appear a lot in myths. Why? Well, it's probably because Hestia was the goddess of the hearth, which was so central to everyday life in ancient Greece that they probably didn't think that people in the future wouldn't know about her, since back in their day, everyone knew about how important she was, so they didn't feel like they had to write down that much about her at the time. That might be its own analysis of human hubris in thinking that civilization would last forever. But whatever, we're getting off track here. Hestia, as I mentioned, is the goddess of the hearth. Mount Olympus's hearth, to be specific, meaning that by extension she guards every city-state's hearth and every home's. Back then, it basically meant that if you were at the hearth, you couldn't get killed off without just reason, since it would be an affront to Hestia and some of the other gods who use Xenia as an epithet. Zeus. Which was enough to scare people into not indulging in murder in those places. But Matt, you might say, how does this relate to the Odyssey? Odysseus isn't even home for half the text, so how can Xenia possibly be relevant to this video? And to that, I say, he invades everyone else's homes. Like, everybody's. Sure, it might be gray in terms of whose fault it is, but that's basically all he does the entire time. Anyways, now that we've established a rough definition of Xenia, it's time to get into how it's one of the central themes of the Odyssey, especially in terms of the relationship that each character or group of characters has to it. This analysis will be a long one, since the Odyssey is incredibly dense. So, I'll be sectioning this analysis into multiple videos as I go through each book or chapter of the Odyssey. This video will cover the first 2 of the 24 books in the Odyssey, essentially the opening of the epic with Telemachus and the Suitors. So, contrary to what many of you might think, we don't open the Odyssey with Odysseus. Instead, we're taken to Mount Olympus where the Olympians, minus Poseidon, are all talking shit about humans after the whole Orestes Clytemnestra murder went down. Athena, taking the chance, brings up Odysseus, who is still trapped on Calypso's island due to Poseidon's grievance against the king of Ithaca. Here, we learn and are teased with the fact that Odysseus violated Xenia and the concept of societal honor by killing Polyphemus's sheep and invading his home before then blinding him. To cut things short, Athena basically begs Zeus to help Odysseus despite Poseidon's wrath. Zeus agrees, but only if she can convince the other gods to do so as well, so that if Poseidon throws a hissy fit, the rest of the pantheon will bring him down a peg. Agreeing to her father's conditions, Athena goes to tell Penelope and Telemachus that Odysseus will come home soon. When she gets there, she's immediately met with a violation of Xenia. NANI?! The Suitors' mistreatment of Telemachus and Penelope in Odysseus' palace, which the burnt-out 20-year-old Telemachus is dealing with. I can make so many Gen Z jokes about us having to deal with older people screwing up our lives here. Anyway, Athena disguises herself as the king Mentes and shuffles into the gateway of Odysseus' palace. Here, we see the duality of good Xenia in Telemachus and its violation or bad Xenia by the Suitors.
Boo! You suck!
To paint a picture, the Suitors are drinking their wine, playing games outside the palace walls, and gorging themselves on meat from the palace's pantries while servants bustle about trying to refill their plates and goblets. In essence, they're taking advantage of their missing king's hospitality and trashing Telemachus and Penelope's home. Contrasting the Suitors' violation of Xenia, Telemachus welcomes Athena with open arms, takes her spear, kind of like someone hanging up your coat for you back then I guess, then gets her seat as well as some food. Athena notices this juxtaposition and says, "These guests, how atrociously they are behaving. What right they made over the whole house. It is enough to disgust any respectable person who comes near them." To skip over a lot of her dialogue here, since it doesn't have too much to do with our analysis, she exposits a bit more to tell Telemachus to follow her plot points before trying to leave. Telemachus, in his infinitely good example of Xenia and good boy status, asks her if she would not rather bathe and sleep the night before leaving again. Impressed by his goodwill at such a young age, Athena as Mentes promises him good blessings if he prays to Athena, then turns into a bird and dips. This kind of grayish or duality of good and bad Xenia will come up over and over again throughout the entire Odyssey. Like in Book 1, this book reinforces the dichotomy between Telemachus' good Xenia compared to the Suitors' display of very poor Xenia, especially their leader, Antinous. To begin, Homer informs us that Aegyptius, one of the oldest suitors, asks about who summoned all of Penelope's suitors into the Great Hall. His son Antiphus, as we'll touch on in a later video, is one of the men that the Cyclops Polyphemus had eaten back when Odysseus still had a crew. Telemachus answers that he did so, and then launches into a speech about two things. First, he chastises them about how, in Odysseus' absence, the suitors are all vying for Penelope's hand without her consent, and sending gifts to her father Atreus in the hopes that he allows one of them to marry her. Second, he says that they are being unwelcome in sacrificing his oxen, sheep, wine, and so on to the gods as if it were their own stock instead of Odysseus' stores. Essentially, he's calling them out for displaying poor Xenia as part of the house guests portion of hospitality. What's intriguing here is that he's specifically calling them out as an affront to heaven, especially Zeus, who, as we've established, is one of the upholders of Xenia, when Telemachus says, "Fear too the wrath of heaven, lest the gods be displeased and turn upon you. I pray by Zeus and Themis, who is the beginning and end of councils. Do not hold back, my friends, and leave me single-handed." While most of the suitors are ashamed for their actions, Antinous calls Telemachus a brat and Penelope a trickster for her famous trick where she'd spin her loom during the day before undoing it at night to keep the suitors at bay. He even goes so far as to lightly insult Athena in the middle of his speech when he threatens, "Send your mother away, and bid her marry the man of her own and her father's choice. For I do not know what will happen if she goes on plaguing us much longer with the airs she gives herself on the score of the accomplishments Athene has taught her." He basically ends his speech by then telling Telemachus to shove it, and that until Penelope takes a new husband, they'll all eat him out of house and home. In response, Telemachus drops a very important reality check in relation to Xenia and marriage relations. "Antinous, how can I drive the mother who bore me from my father's house? It will be hard on me if I have to pay Atreus the large sum with which I must give him if I insist on sending his daughter back to him. Not only will he deal rigorously with me, but heaven will also punish me. For my mother, when she leaves the house, will call on the Furies to avenge her. Besides, it would not be a creditable thing to do, and I will have nothing to say to it. If you choose to take offense to this, leave the house and feast elsewhere at one another's house. At your own cost, turn and turn about. If, on the other hand, you elect to persist in sponging upon one man, heaven help me, but Zeus shall reckon with you in full. And when you fall in my father's house, there shall be no man to avenge you." To extenuate this point, Zeus sends two eagles to Telemachus' side, shining down light upon them, which clearly shows favor for Telemachus, who has the moral high ground in rapport with his good Xenia as the host in Zeus's eyes. When the prophet Halitherses seized them, he himself warned the suitors that it is an omen of Zeus, that the suitors should respect Telemachus since it is a sign that Odysseus will return home soon, and wreak havoc on them with Zeus's blessing for their wicked treatment of Odysseus' family, or, in other words, violating Xenia. Another suitor, Eurymachus, tells Halitherses that he's saying nonsense, and that he'll follow Antinous' lead in eating Telemachus' food and enjoying his house until Penelope weds one of them. Before moving to the end of this book, I wanted to focus on how the dialogue between Telemachus and the suitors in this book is amazing, because it showcases the duality of the host and the guest's responsibilities in terms of Xenia. From the host's side, Telemachus is presented as having the moral high ground since in both the eyes of the gods like Zeus and the people of Ithaca, He has been an excellent host by providing room and board for the suitors despite how much it costs him and Penelope. So much so that Zeus himself, as the one responsible for overseeing Xenia, besides Hestia, sends favors to him in the form of 2 eagles. On the other hand, the suitors like Antinous and Eurymachus show very poor Xenia. First, by harassing their hosts, i.e. Penelope and Telemachus, for Penelope's hand in marriage and Telemachus's palace respectively, which violates sacred laws of marriage and hospitality or Xenia. Second, for treating Telemachus's palace like their own, insulting him and threatening him and Penelope with that "don't try us little bro" type of energy, despite the clear repercussions that Telemachus laid out in response to their violation of Xenia. Now, to end this book, I wanted to make a note of how Athena is represented here when she comes back. Because when Telemachus leaves the throng of suitors who keep on jeering at him and plan to divide up his estate if he dies at sea, she isn't Athena, the goddess of war. She's Athena, the daughter of Zeus. That distinction is really important because when he prays to her and she appears, that diction makes it clear that she's an extension of Zeus, likely under the epithet of Zeus Xenios that we learned about earlier. In doing so, she is Athena Xenia, Zeus's enforcer against those she calls those foolish suitors, who have neither sense nor virtue, and give no thought to death and to the doom that will shortly fall on one and all of them, so that they will perish on the same day. She then personally prepares Telemachus's ship, and the book ends with Telemachus requesting his maid and old wet nurse, Euryclea, to prepare provisions for his journey to Pylos and Sparta thereafter. Okay. That was a lot. To get to the question that you must be asking after hearing me yap for ages, Mac, why did Homer make this duality of Xenia one of the first things that we see? Or, more aptly, why do I care? To answer that question, I'll first start by focusing on Telemachus by asking another question. Why is Homer introducing Telemachus through hospitality rather than courage, intelligence, or strength? After all, Telemachus has no martial achievements yet. He has no political power. He can't stop the suitors from ruining his and Penelope's lives. And yet Homer repeatedly shows him behaving correctly according to Xenia. The reason why Homer chooses to characterize Telemachus this way is to tell us, the audience, or the ancient Greeks back then, that moral legitimacy comes before political legitimacy, at least in the eyes of the gods. In other words, Telemachus teaches the ancient Greeks that positive Xenia gives you the moral high ground, since the gods will see you in a positive light, while telling us modern people that ancient Greek society valued upholding hospitality and honor over positions of power. In reference to the gods, at least. But still, put simply, Homer establishes Telemachus as a rightful heir and all-around good boy before he establishes him as a hero king or prince. This fact is not only reinforced by Telemachus's actions, but also in how the suitors are his antithesis. Because if we're talking about Antinous and the other suitors, Homer could have made them all murderers and larger-than-life villains. Instead, he makes them all guests. Horrible ones, but that's the point. The suitors don't fulfill the social contract of Xenia as guests because of this social abuse against Telemachus and Penelope, so much so that the king of the gods and his direct enforcer both make note of how they'll meet a terrible fate for betraying Telemachus's hospitality. This allows audiences, both ancient and modern, to go from, wow, these guys are rude, to these twits are breaking one of the most fundamental rules that allows our society to function, while also affronting Hestia, which Big Bro Zeus takes as a big no-no. As the audience, we don't need to be told that they're being bad when the literal goddess of wisdom is saying that they're a bunch of tools. These first 2 books of the Odyssey set the tone for the rest of the story. Xenia is a core theme in the Odyssey, and opening with Telemachus and the Suitors allows us to get a glimpse at that, by also providing the audience with 2 perfect extremes of good and bad destined friendship. Why? Because beyond what I've demonstrated in this episode, Xenia isn't just a theme to point out every time someone acts a fool. Xenia is the framework that Homer uses to judge nearly every major character in the Odyssey, including Odysseus himself when we'll eventually get to him. Especially Odysseus too, because his relation to Xenia and those he met on his journey set the stage for Telemachus and the Suitors in these first 2 books. The question at the end of the day in the Odyssey, then, isn't simply are the characters strong or clever. It's how do the characters in the Odyssey treat strangers, guests, and hosts. That is what the gods and ancient Greek society cared much more about, since you could be the best hero or king in the world, like a dime a dozen in mythology, but what sets you apart, and will probably let you avoid karma, is upholding your moral duties to others around you. With that all said and done, I'm going to close this episode here. Thank you so much for taking the time to visit my archive here on YouTube. I'm your host, Mac or Macaque, and if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment about your thoughts on this episode and how excited you are about Christopher Nolan's movie. I have more episodes in the works, mainly about anime and settler colonialism, so if you're looking forward to that, then stay tuned, because those will be out soon. Hopefully. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you on the next episode of Footnotes and Folklore. Bye! Just to put a side tangent here before we move on to book 2, because this next part confused me. Right after Athena leaves, Penelope comes down to where Telemachus is, crying and all of that kind of stuff under her veil, but before she can even really get any empathy or care from her boy, he basically tells her to shut up and go back to her room. Which is like, sure, men in ancient Greece had a bunch of power over the household, but like, Penelope's from Sparta. She might not have been trained for war, but it beguiles me that she isn't more stoic or grey-rocking the Suitors, since from my understanding, Spartan women were still strong in mind and body. Like, she's a queen. The queen in this story. Go kick their ass and tell Telemachus off for talking back to you. I don't care if there's hundreds of suitors trying to kill her. If Odysseus can come back and spend a fourth of the Odyssey killing them all, so can she. And if Telemachus can tell off the suitors for being simps for her right after this, then Penelope can do that herself. Anyway, on to book 2.